Hey guys, Ron here. Hope everyone's well. Well, look at this jacket. To a California boy like me, Southern California as a matter of fact, all my life, this is freezing. It's 48 degrees and all fogged in. I know you're laughing. Those of you in other states and other countries, 48 degrees, nothing. I mean, right now in Wyoming, it's, I think, minus 30 in some parts of the states. I would literally die. I die. I freeze in place. Anyway, but it's cold for me. I'm going to show you the Christmas lights. We're going to talk about a very interesting subject, another mystery. And that mystery, I mean, some say it's concluded. It's not a mystery to me. I think there was a lot left on the table there. It's the mystery of what happened at Chappaquiddick on July 19th, Chappaquiddick Island off Martha's Vineyard, July 19th, 1969, right around the time of the moon, the space landing, Apollo 11. So two big things happening at once. Moonwalk was bigger, but Chappaquiddick is the event that probably ruined Teddy Kennedy's chance of ever being president. That's what my mom always used to tell me. She said, Teddy Kennedy probably would have been president except for Chappaquiddick. Well, it's quite possible, although I don't think he ever wanted it. But let's talk about what happened there and go from there. So I'll give you a little background. And actually, tonight, the boats in the harbor make sense. Very foggy here. Might be even too foggy for the R guys. Anyway, okay, so in 1968, Robert Kennedy, senator by that time, was running for president. And he might have well got the Democratic nomination after Lyndon Johnson said he wasn't going to run for another term. But as we know, on June 4th, 1968, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. Well, Bobby Kennedy had a dedicated staff, obviously, as every politician does, working for him. And there were a group of women known as the Boiler Girls. And it was, I don't know how many there were in total, but I know that there were 6 of them that were at this Chappaquiddick party a year later. But basically, a couple months after Bobby died, there was the first sort of reunion. And all the Boiler Room girls got together, and it was sort of like a purge, because they were very close with. They really believed in Bobby Kennedy, really wanted to be president. Well, about 13 months later, the Boiler Room girls, 6 of them in total, including 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne, got together at Martha's Vineyard, Chappaquiddick Island, exactly, the town of Edgerton, which wasn't too far from the Kennedy family compound at Hyannisport, which I would imagine is the compound even to this day. So they get together, although this time it was Teddy Kennedy, who really wanted to have a party with the girls and just celebrate the fact that all they had done for his late brother. So there was a regatta yacht race in Edgartown, or in that area off Chappaquiddick. And then there was to be a cookout, and then one of Kennedy's guys had rented, in fact, I think it was his cousin, Joe Gargon, who figures in the story too, had rented a cottage, a house, on Chappaquiddick Island. The party was going to be held, and it was held, the cookout and the party was held at the cottage, but people were staying at hotels. There was a motel or a hotel across the channel that the ladies were staying in, and then there was a hotel that Teddy Kennedy was staying in. I don't know where Gargan and the other guys were staying, but this group, this get-together, was the 6 as they called themselves, the Boiler Room Girls, and I believe they were all in their 20s, and 6 men. Ted Kennedy, Kennedy's cousin, Joe Gargon, another friend of his, and I really am not 100% positive about the other 3. I think one of them was Ted Kennedy's chauffeur, a 63-year-old man, and I don't know exactly who the other 2 were, but we'll discuss as much as I do know. So it was 6 and 6. Now, half the guys were married, and none of the girls were married. So they're getting together. Ted Kennedy is in the regatta, the race. Excuse me. Then there's the cookout later in the afternoon into the evening, and then they had a party in the evening at the cottage. And as it's portrayed, at least in film, and most of the people kind of passed out there at the party and ended up there the next morning, but I don't know for sure. I don't know how many actually made it back to the hotel. In fact, the ferry that ran between the cottage and the town where the hotel was stopped running around midnight, so I doubt that many of them were able to make it back to the motels in time. But that notwithstanding, that's what happened. Now, here's Teddy Kennedy's story. He says about 11 Senator Edward Kennedy, brother of the late Robert Kennedy, and brother, of course, of President John F. Kennedy. Now, Ted Kennedy ran for Senate in 1962, and it was his brother Jack's old seat. Brother Jack becomes president, the seat's open, Ted runs for Senate and wins. Now, Ted was always known kind of as the black sheep of the family. Ted Kennedy was the youngest one. He was in a cheating scandal at Harvard. He was arrested for reckless driving and possible DUI while he was in school. He was a troublemaker and, purportedly a voracious appetited, that appetite is not a word, but, womanizer like Jack and like Joe Jr., his late brother, and definitely like his father, and a big drinker. In fact, probably the biggest drinker, I'd say absolutely the biggest drinker of the family, it seems like, and possibly a full-fledged alcoholic even by 1969. In fact, but let me get back. So he runs for Senate, according to most accounts, kind of begrudgingly. He knew that, he had to fall. First, it was going to be Joe Jr.'s turn. Joe Jr. that was Dad's favorite. Joe Jr. was killed during World War II on a very brave but reckless mission. Because Joe Jr. was dead, it had to be Jack's turn. So Jack then ran for Congress, then for Senate, then becomes president. Then it was going to be Bobby's turn, and Bobby, Attorney General under his brother Jack, and then ran for Senate and won from New York. And because he had to run in New York in '64 because his brother Teddy, who we're talking about, was already the senator from Massachusetts. So the only open slot was New York, a state that was not their home state. But he won, and then Teddy became senator, Bobby became senator, and Bobby ran for president and might have been president if not assassinated. And then the plan was it would be Teddy, and then, destiny fulfilled, right? So Teddy always had the expectation that he would continue in the line along with his brothers. That was the expectation put on him by his father, and that was the destiny he was expected to fulfill. And obviously with those mishaps and his own insecurity about himself, and then when he was running for, like I say, probably somewhat reluctantly for Senate in 1962, his first political office, his opponent said, if your name were Edward Moore instead of Edward Moore Kennedy, Moore was Teddy's middle name, and I don't remember who Moore was, but he was a good friend of his father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., who gave Teddy his friend Moore's middle name. But anyway, his opponent said, if your name was Edward Moore instead of Edward Moore Kennedy, this campaign would be a joke. Your campaign would be a joke, meaning that Teddy Kennedy at that time was he was accusing Ted Kennedy just of nepotism, a guy who had never held a job in his life, which is true, and who was only rose to prominence and got the Democratic nomination for senator in Massachusetts 1962 because his brother was at that time president of the United States. His other brother was Attorney General of the United States, appointed by brother number one. So it was the Kennedy dynasty, you see. But Teddy did win, and love him or hate him, or think he was a drunk and a buffoon and a womanizer, which many people did, or an effective senator, Teddy Kennedy remained senator for 47 years, from 1962 until the day he died. So I would have to imagine, now I didn't follow Massachusetts politics all that quickly. In fact, I've never been to Massachusetts, but I have to believe he was somewhat of an effective senator. After 47 years, he must have gotten it down pretty well. He was known as the Lion of the Senate, very, very liberal. He had his scandals. He had his scandals with drinking and women, and he was involved in the William Kennedy Smith rape trial. He was there at the Palm Beach compound the night of the alleged rape with his nephew. So, and they were in the bar when it all happened, when the lady was met by William Kennedy Smith, and then they all took her home. I mean, he just couldn't seem to say, even in his 60s, couldn't seem to stay away from scandal. I'm listening to the waves crash in. Can't see them, but boy, they're loud, and it's across the channel there. So here's what happened. I'm spending way too much time in this. Let's talk about what happened that night at Chappaquiddick. So according to Ted Kennedy, after the cookout, after the party, and people have said Ted Kennedy was drinking all day and night. In fact, there was an incident that prior April where apparently he got drunk on a plane coming back from Alaska, and this was a political trip to, I think it was about Bureau of Indian Affairs, something to do with Eskimos in Alaska, which Bureau of Indian Affairs, maybe they weren't Indians, which are now called Native Americans. They were actually Eskimos. But anyway, Teddy Kennedy, doing his political thing, apparently got drunk on the plane, and he said in front of people, they're going to shoot my ass off like they did Bobby's. That he was very preoccupied with getting assassinated, that he was going downhill mentally. So some say that his drinking had really escalated since his brother Bobby had died the prior year, and that he was mentally, emotionally not doing all that well, and his marriage to Joan certainly wasn't doing all that well. Now, they stayed married for another, about 12 years after this, but I think they were essentially married in name only, separated basically for various reasons by 1969. In fact, Joan later went to rehab, something Teddy obviously couldn't do because of his political stature, but he probably could have used it too. So both alcoholics, both engaging in extramarital affairs, and not pretty. So anyway, that's more background. Let's talk about that night. So that night, Joan was very pregnant, so she wasn't involved in this party, and I would imagine Teddy was pretty happy about that. But again, that's just my own speculation. So, in fact, she would later miscarry just I believe just a couple weeks after the incident. So, July 19th, the cookout happens, the party happens. Now, this is Ted Kennedy's story. I'll tell you what Ted Kennedy said, and then I'll tell you what I think really happened, because I don't buy it. There's a lot of inconsistencies, and a lot of the American public didn't buy it. But after the incident, Ted Kennedy gave a speech on national TV, and he said, flood my office. Obviously no internet then, no Twitter. He said, flood my office with phone calls and letters. If you think I should step down or resign, I will. If you think I should stay the course, I will. And more letters came in saying stay the course, and he was reelected president. He was a reelected senator a year and a half later, and he remained senator, like I said, for the next 46 years until his death. So it only hurt his political career in terms of whether he was electable as president. Okay, I keep getting astray. So on that night, according to Ted Kennedy, at around 11:15 that night, Mary Jo Kopechne says she wants to go back to her hotel because she's not feeling well. I don't know, a combination of too much drink, too much partying, too much sun during the day, so on and so forth. So Ted Kennedy says he's going to drive her home. Now let's start with the inconsistencies right off the bat. First of all, Ted apparently was a terrible driver and didn't drive that much. Like I said, his chauffeur could have easily driven Mary Jo back to, really, he was just driving her to the ferry, I guess, and then back to the hotel across the channel. But Ted Kennedy elects to drive her in his car. So, according to Ted, he drives, and, oh yes, inconsistency number 2. Mary Jo's purse, including her hotel room key, was left at the cottage. So it appears that she didn't really want to go back to the hotel, that she knew they'd be coming back to the cottage. Either that, or she's just so spaced out, she left her purse and her room key, with her room key in it and everything in it, as they called them then, pocketbook. Now, ladies listening, would you ever leave your purse anywhere, no matter how drunk you might be or out of sorts? And there's no report that she was like stumbling, falling down drunk or anything like that. Her blood alcohol content was 0.9, I believe, and you guys will have to tell me what that means, because I'm not up on that lingo. Anyway, so Ted Kennedy says he's going to take her home because she doesn't feel good. Again, why is the chauffeur not driving her? Number one, why didn't anybody? And everyone said no one said that they knew that Senator Ted, and Mary Jo left the party. They just took off. And why would Mary Jo leave her purse there? Okay, so according to Ted Kennedy, he makes a wrong turn because he says he's unfamiliar with the road, and he leaves the paved road and he enters a small dirt road. Now, he had been on that very road where the bridge was 3 or 4 times just that day during the regatta, so he was not unfamiliar with the road. He had been there, but he's now saying he's unfamiliar with the road. He says that he took a wrong turn, he ends up on the dirt road, and then ends up on the small bridge at the end of the dirt road called Dyke Bridge. He immediately brakes hard, and the car goes in the water. The car goes in the water and ends up upside down. He says that he has no recollection of how he himself got out of the car, but he did get out of the car. He says he repeatedly dove down to try to rescue Mary Jo, but he couldn't. Then he said he swam up to the surface and he kind of laid in the grass for a while to recover from the shock. Then he says he walked the mile back to the cottage, and without telling anyone there, he gets Joe Gargon, his cousin, and the other friend, and the 3 of them drive back in Joe's rented car, which was white, and that's going to come into prominence later. And they drive back in the car, and then he says Joe and his friend, Paul, I believe it was, an attorney, repeatedly dive down and try to rescue Mary Jo, but she can't, and they can't, and she's probably already dead at that time. Okay, now at some point after that, Teddy says that he gets to the other side of the island and swims the channel because the ferry's down. He swims in a state of shock back to the 500 feet across the channel, back to his hotel, and goes in his hotel and tries to sleep. Doesn't alert any authorities, by his own admission. Then he says he comes down at around 2:15 in the morning, and he's complaining about a party that some other motel guests are having with people who work at the motel. Some people say that was to establish an alibi that his father had convinced him via telephone to do. Again, he doesn't mention anything about what happened to Mary Jo. He later states he was in a state of shock. Now in the morning, Teddy is seen by 8 a.m. and he's engaging other guests. In fact, there's another couple that were there. You know, Martha's Vineyard was then what it is today. Today it's home to a lot of Hollywood celebrities, a very, very Democratic stronghold, very, like Beverly, well, I was going to say Beverly Hills or Malibu. That's not quite as much. It kind of has more of a mix. But, it was a place where rich Democrats, liberal Democrats gathered. So there were a lot of fans of Teddy Kennedy and the Kennedys in general on Martha's Vineyard, including this couple who were very happy to talk to him that night. So at 8 a.m. they're talking to him, and they state that at around 8:30, Joe Gargon and the friend approach Ted Kennedy. They pull him away into one of their rooms. I think it was into Teddy's room at the motel. And they said 3 minutes later, Teddy and the other 2 guys exit the hotel room, and Teddy now, his whole demeanor changes. Now he's not friendly or relaxed. Now they said he's agitated, he's sweating, he's upset, and he didn't even say goodbye to them. So what does that mean? Well, we'll talk about it later. So at that point, it had already been reported just around that time that by a fisherman and his son that they had found the car overturned. So Jim Arena, the sheriff, goes and he borrows the trunks of a couple this is a small town. He borrows swim trunks and he dives down himself, and he can't rescue Mary Jo, but he determines that it's a person down there trapped in the car, deceased. So eventually they get divers out, eventually they get the medical examiner, so on and so forth out there. And throughout this process, throughout the day, Ted Kennedy writes a statement. He immediately says he was driving. He says, what I told you guys a minute ago, he was in shock. He should have reported it earlier. He dove down and tried to save her, and then his cousin and his friend dove down separately afterwards and tried to save her. And this is all going on. He contacts the Kopechne's parents, and obviously the boiler room girls and the people at the party find out, and then this starts becoming a headline. So Mary Jo's deceased. What's really interesting was that there was no autopsy, and it appeared to the divers that she had not drowned. It appeared that there was an air pocket, meaning that there was air in the car, and she probably struggled, possibly even for hours, and it died slowly and suffocated to death, and that they could have saved her had it been reported right away. The other inconsistency was that there were no marks on her, meaning that it appeared from tests that had been done in crash investigators that had she been in the passenger seat, she would have been a lot more messed up than she was. Their conclusion was that, get this, that Mary Jo was driving the vehicle and went off the bridge herself. Now, Teddy Kennedy said that he was driving at about 20 miles an hour. Now, later, the report showed, they did recreations, you can see it all on, there's some great documentaries about it, that the car was actually going about 35 miles an hour when it spud off Dyke Bridge and into the bay there. So now we have the inquest. Ted Kennedy shows up to the funeral. He's wearing this ridiculous neck brace nobody had ever seen him in. Obviously it was a fake. I don't think anybody ever believed that to gather sympathy for himself. He admits guilt, and he's given I think a suspended sentence for leaving the scene of an accident and community service, and that was it. There was no legal ramifications for Ted Kennedy. Now, during the inquest, and even before the formal inquest started a short time later, there were statements that were sort of overlooked by the sheriff, which is strange to me to this day. Now, this individual is dead. I think he died in 2012, but the assistant sheriff, or I guess second in line to the sheriff, Chris Look, who went by the nickname Huck. So everybody called him Huck. Huck Look states that around 1240, okay, much later than the 11:15 time frame given by Ted Kennedy, Huck Look states that around 1240 he was just finishing his night of work, and he was right near the bridge there on Chappaquiddick Road. And he says that he saw a dark sedan pulled off to the side of the road, and he remembered at least two of the numbers, 2 to 4 of the digits on the license plate. And by the way, yes, they did match up with Ted Kennedy's license plate. Now, he says he got out of his car because he thought, a car that late at night on the side of the road might be people in distress. He saw a man driving in the driver's seat, a woman in the passenger seat, and either a person or clothing in the rear of the vehicle, in the back seat. So he says he approached the vehicle, and it speeds off towards the bridge, and he, if he would have followed, it would have been one thing, but he didn't. He left, presumably to go home, and that's when the vehicle, very shortly afterwards, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 1 minute after, sped off the bridge, and Mary Jo dies. Now, here's what I think happened. Yes, it's a quote-unquote conspiracy theory, but a lot of things are conspiracy theories. Doesn't mean they're false. I don't think Ted Kennedy ever went in the water. I think this is what happened. I think that, and again, I'm not the only one to think this, but I'll try to tell you why I believe this. I think that Teddy took Mary Jo out in the car. She left the purse because she knew they were getting back to the cottage. He might have said, hey, you want to take a ride, get some air, talk, have a drink, whatever. They go off in his car. They pull off the side of the road. I think we know what Teddy's intentions probably were. We don't know where Mary Jo was game or not, but I think that's what happened. Then I think they see Huck Look. All of a sudden, they see Huck Look's, police sirens right behind him, and he's like, oh shit. He panics. He's with an underage, not an underage. He's with a young unmarried girl. He's drunker than a skunk. Old expression, I know, but it just came to me. He's driving intoxicated. He's with a young girl who is not his wife while his wife is pregnant at home, it doesn't look good. It looks like scandal. So I think what he said was to Mary Jo, take off, circle around, I'll walk back to, and eventually drive back to the cottage, I'll walk back, whatever the case may be, or pick me up in 2 minutes or in 5 minutes. I think that at that point, Teddy hid by the side of the road. Huckleff, she takes off in the driver's seat, drives the car. She, being unfamiliar, because she had never been over that road, that dirt road, or the bridge like Teddy had earlier in the day, she, Mary Jo, speeds up to 35 miles an hour, goes on the bridge, loses control, skids for a number of feet, which was documented. She ends up in the water with the turned over car, with the air pocket, and she's left to die. That's what I think. Now, whether Ted heard the crash, went in, wasn't too intoxicated to deal with it, whether he did try to save her, I don't know. That remains a mystery. Did he really then go back to the cottage? Maybe. Did the guys come back and really dive and try to get her? Possibly. Did he really swim then that 500 yards? I mean, nobody said they saw him rumpled or wet, but again, it would have been, well after midnight, possibly even later, because I don't think anybody saw him come back until the night watchman at 2:15 when Teddy came down to complain about the noise. He probably would have had at least some time to, I would imagine he would have gone in his room, changed, and then come back out again. So that's what I think happened. I don't think he was even in the car that night. I think that he told Mary Jo to go because he didn't want to be caught with her in the car, and he thought that Deputy Look was going to catch them in a vulnerable position. That's what I think happened. So, like I said, the interesting thing was, many interesting things, there was no autopsy on Mary Jo. It would have determined whether she drowned, whether there was even water in her lungs, or there was an air pocket and she suffocated. Now, the DA did get permission to exhume the body later and do an autopsy, and the parents refused. Now, through the years, of course, there was much speculation, and people said, conspiracy theorists who believe in a cover-up believe that, among other things, that the Kennedy family paid off the Chappaquiddick family to not allow an autopsy. Again, we'll never know if that's true. I mean, same people say that the Kennedy family paid off Pat Newcomb, Marilyn Monroe's publicist, and her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, after Marilyn's death. We do know that Eunice Murray took several extended trips to Europe, couldn't be located for interviews or the police to talk to, and she had very little money. And we do know that Pat Newcomb went immediately. This is a woman who worked for the studio and for Marilyn Monroe, not for the Kennedy family. This is a woman who immediately after Marilyn Monroe's death went to Hyannisport, the Kennedy compound. Why was she in Hyannisport? Why was the Kennedy family suddenly involved with her? Well, so like I say, it's an old pattern. People believe the Kennedy family would pay off people when they were in trouble. And that is the belief, that they paid off the Chappaquiddick, which is very sad, because you think no amount of money would equal getting to the truth of what happened, unless they just sort of said, you know what, she's dead, nothing's going to bring her back. Whether she drowned or suffocated doesn't really matter. And if she herself was driving and they were in a sexual situation, that would be even more embarrassing. Good Catholic girl. In fact, Mary Jo had just recently broken up with a boyfriend. So who knows what her state of mind was? Who knows how much she had to drink that night? Who knows how much Teddy had to drink, although I can only imagine. And who knows if anybody said they saw them leave. I mean, everybody at the party said, oh, we had no idea they left, or certainly left together. Who knows who's covering whom? Anyway, Ted Kennedy finally did run for president in 1980, which is weird because he chose to run a year that the incumbent president, Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, was already running. So he challenged him in the primaries, which I don't think anybody had a chance. The incumbent usually is going to win the primary against a challenger. Jimmy Carter had just been president for 4 years. And Ted Kennedy, lost the primary. Carter remained the president and was able to run against the Republican, um, Ronald Reagan, who he lost to. But anyway, more was kind of attributed to Kennedy's kind of lack of knowledge on foreign and domestic issues. But who knows? Who knows? I always remember the speech that Ted Kennedy gave at the end of that when he had to drop out of the race in '80. And I think it was the best speech he ever gave, except for the speech when Bobby Kennedy died. My point is, it seemed to me like Ted Kennedy was so relieved that he had run for president, probably to please his family and his fans, and that he had lost. He didn't have to run in the general election. He probably breathed a sigh of relief, but we'll never know. I'm not him. Anyway, but it was quite the burden to bear, and he did bear the burden of Chappaquiddick questions about it for the rest of his life, and not just from his Republican opponents, but from people everywhere. So let me know what you guys think about Chappaquiddick. There's a lot of good documentation on it online and in old-fashioned ways in books. My name is Ron. If you like the channel, please subscribe. If you do subscribe, hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button, and then you'll be notified when I post. Give the channel likes, folks. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you at the next location. Bye-bye.